When data is sent over the internet to your computer, it needs to know how to accept it. And your computer accepts this data using ports. And these ports are categorized by two protocols, TCP and UDP. Now, a port is a logical connection that is used by programs to exchange information. And these ports have a unique number that identifies them. The number ranges from 0 to 65535, but for the exam, you only need to know a few of them. So here is a chart of the ports that you need to know for the exam. Some of these ports are very common and are used every single day, such as port 80, which is used for bringing up web pages on the internet. Another one is port 443, which is used for logging into secure web pages that require a login and password. And another common one is port 25, and this is used for sending email from an email application such as Microsoft Outlook. DNS stands for Domain Name System. Now this resolves domain names to IP addresses. In the world of networking, computers don't go by names like humans do. They go by numbers. So if you type in a web address in your web browser, DNS will transform the name to a number, because all computers know are numbers. So for a demonstration, when you type in yahoo.com in your web browser, the DNS server will search through its database to find a matching IP address for that domain name. And when it finds it, it will transform that domain name to the IP address of the Yahoo web server. So DNS basically works like a phone book. When you want to find a phone number, you don't look up the number first. You look up the name first. Then it will give you the number. Now WIN stands for Windows Internet Name Service, and this is used on NetBEUI networks. This service is similar to DNS, and as you recall, DNS resolves domain names to IP addresses, but WINS resolves NetBIOS names or computer names to IP addresses. So if you wanted to communicate with another computer on the same network, you would do so by using the computer's name, and then the WIN server will resolve the name to the IP address of that computer. This is called Network Address Translation, or NAT, and this is a service that is typically used in routers. And this is used to translate a set of IP addresses to another set of IP addresses. So for example, here we have a private network, and it's using a set of private IP addresses internally. Over here we have the router with its public IP address, and this router is running the NAT service. If a computer in this network wanted to communicate over the internet, it needs to translate its private IP address to the internet's public IP address. And this goes both ways. If a computer on the internet wants to communicate with a computer on this private network, then the public IP address needs to be translated to the private IP address for that computer. Another version of network address translation is called PAT, which stands for Port Address Translation. Now this translates IP addresses based on port numbers. Each computer in a private network is issued not only a unique IP address, but they are also issued a unique port number. This is done so that external data packets from the internet knows which computer on the private network it wants to talk to. So for example, if a device outside this network wanted to communicate with a computer on this private network, the IP address along with its port number will be translated by PAT to find the correct computer. SNAT stands for Static Network Address Translation. And as you recall from a previous lesson, NAT translates a private network's IP addresses to a public IP address. So in this example here, these private IP addresses will be translated to this one single public IP address, and vice versa. So what SNAT does is that it can link a public IP address with a private IP address permanently. And this is useful when a computer or server needs to be accessed from outside the network. For example, if one of these devices here was a mail server. Now, a proxy service is similar to your web browser. Whenever you look at a web page, your web browser will store that web page into cache. So at a later time, if you were to look at that web page again, your browser retrieves it much faster because it doesn't have to download the contents of that web page all over again, since it's already stored in your computer. And a proxy server does the same thing. So for example, if a company uses a proxy server, whenever a user wants to retrieve a web page, the proxy server will retrieve the web page from the internet on behalf of the user, and then it will store that web page into a centralized cached database. So if another user on a different computer goes to a web page that has been stored in the proxy database, the proxy server does not have to go out on the internet to retrieve the web page. It can simply retrieve it from its database and send it to the user. So a benefit of using a proxy service is speed, since web page retrieval is much faster. Another benefit is that it saves bandwidth, because a proxy server reduces the need to go out on the internet. And finally, it provides security, because it reports what web pages are retrieved to the network administrator. Remote Desktop Protocol is a technology from Microsoft to access a remote computer's desktop. RDP is based on Microsoft Terminal Services. So if a user wanted to access another computer, the user can simply type in an IP address along with the proper credentials, and then the user can have the remote computer's desktop displayed on their own computer screen. When you have a lot of computers on a network and they're all sending data, the potential for collisions is present. And when you have collisions, data communication is lost. So that's why they developed a protocol called CSMA-CD, which stands for Carrier Sense Multiple Access Collision Detection. And this is the access method used on Ethernet networks. And this method works by each computer first sensing if the wire is idle, and if it is, it sends its data, therefore avoiding any collisions. But if you have two computers trying to send data at the same time, a collision will happen. And if a collision happens, the computers will wait a random amount of time and retries to send their data. CSMA-CA stands for Carrier Sense Multiple Access with Collision Avoidance. And this is the access method used for carrier transmission in wireless networks. Now this method is similar to the CSMA-CD, except that when a computer wants to send its data, it first sends out a small data packet to make sure that the channel is clear before sending out its main data. If the packet is successfully transmitted, then the computer is clear to send out its main data. The term broadcast refers to when there is a single transmitter of data, and that data is being received by multiple receivers. For example, a wireless router can broadcast its wireless signal and be picked up by multiple computers to access the internet. The difference between unicast and multicast is that with unicast, the data packets are sent to a single destination. And with multicast, the data packets are sent to multiple destinations at the same time.